Part 1, Before the Arrest. Discuss with me now a DUI investigative stop.
You don't need to roll the window all the way down, just roll it down about 2 inches. The reason you do that is because if you roll it down all the way, they can walk up with a passive alcohol detector, stick it in the window, and that detector will show if there's alcohol in the car. If you only have it down 2 inches, you can slide your documents out through the little crack, but you don't have to let them stick that detector in to see if there's alcohol in the car. That way you haven't given them any evidence of alcohol because they can't get the flashlight, it looks like a big flashlight, into the car to test it.
You have to admit, Mr. Head, that it's going to be quite difficult once, for instance, I am pulled over by an officer of the law that I've always been taught to respect and admire, to only draw my window down 2 inches.
Well, if you only bring the window down 2 inches, here's the thing. The officer can get the documents he or she needs. They don't need to ask you any questions because your name and address are on there, and that's what you have to provide them, your name and address. Give them your license, insurance, registration, and then stay put.
So I am to lean over to my glove compartment, get my proof of registration, pull out my driver's license from my wallet, get my proof of insurance, and slip it in through the 2 inches of the window?
Now, if they force you to take the window down further, say, why do you have the window down just 2 inches? You say, well, I just had to give you these documents and I didn't want to roll the window down. It's either too hot or too cold, whatever you want to say. But then when the officer says, I want you to roll the window all the way down, that is a seizure, at least under some case law, that the officer has now exercised dominion over you. If they open your door or make you roll the window down when you did not want to, that is a seizure and a whole new level of detention from an officer.
What is a seizure?
A seizure means, under the Fourth Amendment, that if an officer is going to stop you for, say, speeding, let's just use speeding as an example, and he or she is going to give you a ticket, there's not one word of conversation required, not a word. People want to talk because they're trying to be friendly or they're trying to name drop or something like that, but that doesn't help a bit. All it does is they're recording you the whole time. So they're recording your voice, and if it sounds slurred or a thick tongue, or maybe you just got cotton mouth because all of a sudden you saw emergency lights behind you, the person's not going to sound his or her best. So if you just hand the documents out the window, the questions will always come from the officer. Do you know why I stopped you? Do you know why I pulled you over? Is there some kind of fire you're going to because you're speeding? Whatever the question is, basically just shake your head or nod your head. You don't have to say anything because the verbal part is what's being recorded that will be used against you in court if a DUI is next suspected. The officers are trained in a course called verbal judo. They're taught to ask you a question to get you off balance and get you to give the answers they want. Now, you can answer those questions, but you haven't been trained for days and days on how to ask questions. They have. So if they say, when was your last drink? They're already assuming you've been drinking without asking you. Many people just go ahead and answer that question, and then basically that's the first piece of evidence offered at trial if it gets to trial. If you exercise that good old constitutional right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment, you don't have all those problems. You're not required to utter a sound to get a speeding ticket, not one sound. You just give your papers, they give you the ticket, you put the car in drive, and you go home.
How do you say no to an officer?
Well, 90% of the people go ahead and comply, and 90% of the people are arrested. The field sobriety tests are designed to fail. You can fail 2 points out of 122 on the one-leg stand. That's a fail. 1 point is a pass. You'd never go to a college where you had to score 99% just to pass the course. I think you'd check in somewhere else. If you're a gymnast or a cheerleader, you might. If you're a big, tall, gawky athlete, 7 feet tall, which I've had 2 that were over 7 feet, you'll never pass them. You could try them for 100 years, you'll never pass. If you stand around for 10 minutes trying to balance on one leg, walk a line in an unnatural manner that you would never walk that way, and follow a pen with your eyes in a manner that you can't judge whether he's subjectively grading it correctly or not. Most officers don't do it right in the first place. They don't do it right.
Verbal judo, tricky police questions.
Questions they're asking are lined up so they know what's going to come next. If you say, I haven't been drinking, their next question is, well, you don't mind blowing into this then, because this only detects alcohol, and this will let you be on your way if you don't have any alcohol. So the next question is loaded, coming from their verbal judo training. So the whole point of it is you're at a disadvantage, you're nervous, you're trying to please because you think that's what you need to do. But if you've had anything to drink or there's any smells of something like marijuana coming out of the car, you're going to jail. You don't have to tell them about it. They're going to take you to jail because they're taught if they smell alcohol or think there's any impairing substance, even if you don't do anything, you're going to jail. The question is, do you give them a pile of evidence with which to convict you, or do you give them nothing with which to convict you?
So the first thing that people need to realize when that officer is approaching their car is to realize that the officer is not just inquiring, hey, how you doing? You may have been speeding, your tail light's out. They are already looking for evidence against you as they are approaching your car.
Well, let's say the officer says, your tail light's out. Are you aware of that? And say, why aren't you talking to me? You don't have to verbalize anything because that is evidence that can be used against you. There's a case called Pennsylvania versus Muniz that says if you are fully in custody, they can't do things like that. But when you're just being investigated, every word out of your mouth can be part of the evidence at trial. And people don't realize that there's a microphone right on the vest of the officer that picks up beautifully and reports back to the car, and it's crystal clear. And they'll say that shows slurred speech or thick-tongued speech or some other type of description when they never heard you speak a word in your life. But that's what the evidence will be, and it puts you in a position, if you've talked, to have to get up on the stand and say, that's not anything different, I talk like that all the time. But you don't want to have to get on the stand. If you just remain silent, it's the state's burden of proof. It's not your burden of proof that you're guilty. They have to prove it. They only usually prove it with what comes out of your mouth. That's why I tell people, shut up.
Okay. Now, to follow your advice, and I'm not speaking with the officer, my window is only down a few inches. The officer asks me for my registration, driver's license, the usual. I grab those items and hand them, slip them, as you say, through the window.
Correct.
Am I in custody?
No, you're not in custody then. No court would say that's custody because he's investigating some other type of thing he saw, some offense or a taillight out. Maybe your tag is expired. Anything like that gives an officer a legitimate reason to pull you over, even if he or she thinks this is a drug dealer, this is a drug courier. I like the looks of this car being something like a drug courier, where it's coming from. They can have an ulterior motive under the U.S. Constitution, and that's fine as long as they can articulate and say, this is what I saw that led to the pullover. Now, when they talk about what they saw, just nod your head or shake your head. You don't have to give a verbal answer, just give a nonverbal answer.
I see.
What is the difference between a celebrity DUI and the typical DUI your office might handle?
That's a very good question. And today, in the age of the internet, it has become a problem because many sports and celebrity figures are tweeting or sending information back and forth to their followers. They have told them, I'm going to go to bar X, restaurant Y, and strip club Z. And then these people show up at the estimated times their hero is going to be there. All of a sudden, in a case where we normally have 1 or 2 witnesses, we got 25 or 30 witnesses potentially. The prosecutors will go out and track their Twitter night or anything they've done on Facebook. They will find where they've been and interview every single person, some of whom don't like that particular athlete. Maybe they play for the opposing team. So all of this social media stuff has created a nightmare for us. And the other thing is, if you stop John Q. Public, no police officer or anyone else, such as a tow driver, calls the newspaper. Once something gets in the press, it makes my job much more difficult because there is a tremendous amount of pressure on the prosecutors that they don't make a deal there that might be considered to be a deal better than you would for John Q. Public. They want to be fair, and that's the way they should be. But in truth of fact, these cases many times are my best cases if I could just keep them out of the press. Okay. The press is where I don't want to try the case. I want to try it in court.
What impact does the press or social media have on a high-profile case?
Well, the more common problem is someone at the scene calling a newspaper reporter or somebody with a TV station, and then once one gets it, everybody has it. But today, what's happening, and this is in civil cases, divorce cases, all kind of legal matters, people who are on the other side are going to look at Twitter, Facebook, and any other type of account of where you were that night. They will then go back to those places and interview people. And again, who are they interviewing? Are they interviewing somebody who has a reason that they want to give information that will help them with another criminal case? Are they dealing with somebody that you may not have given a signature or signed a baseball for or something like that? So you can have witnesses you don't want to see in a courtroom because everybody has an opinion, sobriety or non-sobriety, and I have to deal with all of that.
Well, it begs the question then, if you are a professional athlete or some type of celebrity, or even just an average Joe who's going through, for instance, a nasty divorce, do you want to stay off of Twitter, off of Facebook? Do you want to remain a hermit in your home? How can you enjoy your time and your life without anything and everything being used against you?
Well, I think it's important, especially when you're a celebrity or an athlete, to be on these social media things. Don't get me wrong. But you don't have to give your agenda that night so that it's so easy to track where you've been. Because you might not want to say you were at some strip club or something. You don't know where you're going to say something about, and all of a sudden that's on there. So my best advice is just talk about football, basketball, baseball, whatever it may be, and leave all that other stuff off there. Don't tell them your agenda because, frankly, I don't even know if that's safe because you may have somebody from another team that comes there trying to start something with you because of that. But again, I'm having to deal with it occasionally, but more often if it hits the press, it makes my job very difficult. And I've had cases where I positively would have gotten the case reduced or completely dismissed, but for the fact that the newspapers had it and the prosecutor said, I'm not risking my next reelection to let this person off, even though I think you have a good reason to let the person off.
Is it an advantage or disadvantage to be a celebrity or athlete when dealing with a DUI?
I think the situation is the prosecutors, even if they see a case they would normally reduce or dismiss, don't want to have that adverse publicity because they have to run for re-election, and I understand that point too. That means sometimes we have to go to court on these cases, and most of the celebrities, especially the leagues they play in, don't want to have that on TV because it distracts from whatever sport they're in. And you have to fight several battles. You're going with the ownership of the team, you're dealing with the league and whatever they're trying to have you do, and really my job is to represent the athlete. It's not to do any of the others. So sometimes we're fighting league decisions such as we want you to go to treatment. In the middle of a season, you're going to go to treatment? No, that's not going to happen. So we have to fight many battles to work on those cases. Plus, no one is guilty until proven guilty, and we have the same errors that occur in John Q. Public's case that happen in their cases. We just have to know how to assert them, knock out evidence that should not be allowed because it was some violation of a constitutional or a statutory right, and we fight them the same way for them as we do everybody else.
What is your specific advice to a celebrity or pro athlete regarding a DUI?
It's like everyone else. If you learn to exercise your constitutional rights, like I'm talking about, don't roll down the window, don't start talking, just hand out your documents like everybody else, take the ticket and be on your way. If the officer says anything like, I smell alcohol or I think you've been using drugs or whatever, say, well, if there's any question about my ability, I'll leave my keys and my car, you can tow it, I'll walk home or catch a cab. If they won't let you do that, you're in custody. If you're not allowed to leave and you're saying, I'm not going to do the field test because they're optional, they're voluntary, there's no license penalty for doing them, then you don't want to do those. You don't want to talk, you don't want to try to do exercises or agility things because you're on the side of the road. Traffic's coming by. There's never a level road. If it was, water would pool up. It's sloped and it's graded. So the roads are not a good place to be doing it, especially with lights, distractions, darkness, you can't see your feet. It's a very difficult thing to do when you're under a lot of stress.
So your advice remains the same no matter who the person is who sees the blue lights in the rearview mirror.
Correct. Because an athlete sometimes thinks, well, I'm in shape, I can do this. The real truth of the matter is the field tests are designed to fail. Now that's not my words, that's the words of a Clemson University professor, PhD, who studied the field test and found that officers made a mistake in making an arrest decision 46% of the time. Now, that's a high number. That's like flipping a coin. I don't want to be out there and my fate be determined by how well I do on field tests, because things like surgery, things like the surface, things like stress that you may be under, all these things can have a factor. And an athlete who's had multiple head injuries, concussions, he or she's never going to be able to do the field test correctly. Now, can they run somebody down like a deer? Yes, they can run them down. They're fast. But their eyes and their ability to balance are controlled by other things, and most people with head injuries never do the field test correctly.
So it sounds like all of these field sobriety tests are subjective, meaning that you don't really know if you passed or failed like a regular grade test. It's all up to the officer's interpretation.
Really, the only three that have any type of scientific validation, and it's a very low percentage of validation, 65% for the one leg stand, 68% for the walk and turn, and 77% for the eye test. Those are the percentages that the government uses, but in other studies they've been shown to have more false positives than even that says. So the point of it is that's the only three validated studies. The alphabet, counting backwards, touching your nose, anything like that, none of that has the slightest bit of scientific validation. But if you can't do it and a jury is hearing it, they may think you were impaired.
Again, it can be used as evidence against you.
Absolutely. And they might think, well, this is an athlete. He or she should be able to do it better than the average person. But that's not necessarily true. They have injuries. All you have to do is try to watch one baseball, football, or basketball season, and you'll find people taped up, injured, playing injured. And these people are sometimes the most orthopedically challenged of all the people I represent.
But it sounds like you're saying that even if you are in perfect condition and have no health problems, you really can't pass those tests.
Most people can't pass them unless they have exceptional agility. In fact, in one case where I had a young lady who was under 21, but her alcohol level was above a 0.10, and she did the field test, the officer said, "What are you, a gymnast?" She said, "Nope, cheerleader." And she was used to balancing and doing things that we don't normally do because, again, who gets up and walks a beam or does the things that gymnasts and cheerleaders do? We just don't do it. That's an abnormally great ability to handle those. Plus, they're usually shorter. You don't find any 7 feet tall gymnasts doing the balance beam. You don't. You need a low center of gravity, and you also need to have a very good feel for all of your muscle tones because, again, an average person is just not going to be able to walk the line like the officer says to do it.